Just people tend to need relationship because they didn't get a lot of steady, consistent holding. So another person can help them feel more secure, but then we all know that can change at a drop of a hat. It's really, really harmful. I mean, trust me, I've been there. And I think if you're listening, falling in love with someone who's extremely narcissistic and cold and trying to change them is really like the recipe for insanity and disaster. It ends up being more of a controlling relationship. If you're more anxiously attached, you sacrifice and sacrifice and sacrifice yourself for the other person as an adaptive strategy. So you end up in a very scary situation where that person's usually withholding love or shutting down on you or controlling you in some way.
Okay, so I'm so excited to get this started with you because I actually had a couple of friends that actually recommended your book to, when it came to relationships. And I mean, this is just my personal curiosity. I know you wrote The Anxiously Attached because you also went through something like this. Do you think you will also write a book about the avoidant style as well? Or do you think you're just going to stick to the anxious?
Healing avoidant attachment style, some of the healing work is actually the same as healing anxious attachment and all insecure attachment styles. I am writing a book called Safe, Coming Home to Yourself and Others, and it's about healing all attachment wounds.
Oh, okay.
So it will cover avoidant and disorganized.
Disorganized. Do the avoidant and disorganized go together or are they separate?
They're different patterns. They're all different patterns that we store inside. And I actually talk about how we store more than one pattern. We're not just anxiously attached. We can store a couple different patterns inside of us, and it's a combination of two people's. And I had disorganized patterns show up in my life briefly. So I know what they feel like. So we can have pockets of disorganization, pockets of avoidance, pockets of anxious. So it's multi-layered. It's not as categorical as we would like to kind of try to make sense of it.
Oh, okay. So I think the first question is we have to sort of establish some of the key words that you use a lot in the book. So could you define for our readers and viewers what you mean by the little me, the inner protector, and then lastly, the inner nurturer?
Sure. So little me is parts of us that are regressed and younger and that live inside our body. And so a lot of people refer to that as inner child. But in this book, I really start to explain that little me lives in our hearts, our muscles, and our bellies, because that's where we store early memory. So we're starting to listen to our body in new ways. And we're starting to understand that is memory. And we're starting to connect that to younger parts of ourselves that are revealing painful situations or just earlier memories. Yeah, the inner protector. I mean, so we all have like inner protectors. They're the person who says, we're not good enough. They're critical parts of ourselves. Protectors can also be alcohol, excessive spending, anything that kind of numbs us or keeps us protected from our feelings. It has a job to kind of protect us. So we need our protectors to survive in our life. We'd be really struggling without them. But the more healing that you do, the more likely you will not have to listen to your protectors, or you will not need them quite as much. So the goal isn't to get rid of them. We welcome them. They're there for a reason. We start to understand why we cultivated these protectors. And as we start to heal and feel, we're less likely to need them as much, and their need goes down.
So could addictions also be the inner protector? Because you talked about
absolutely.
Okay. So even the things that are actually harmful to us.
They are harmful to us, but adaptively they make sense because they're protecting us from our pain.
Gotcha. Okay. Inner nurturers?
So inner nurturers are people that we've internalized that are loving and supportive. And there are also external people that are nurturing. And it can be a primary caregiver if you had a nurturing primary caregiver, but it can be a teacher, a pet, an aunt, a friend right now, anybody inner and outer that embodies just a nurturing energy that you can use as an internal resource.
Okay. And then as we read through the book, we realize that a lot of the things like the core wounds do happen because of our upbringing, right? And then you talk about the parenting styles. But one of the questions that we had was, there were two. One is, could you have a mixed attachment traumas or triggers from parents. So, for instance, a mom could have been very attentive, but the father was very distant. And the second question is, what if you really grew up in a secure environment? Could you still develop like insecure attachment to your romantic partners?
So the first question, I'm going to say that we embed more than one attachment style. So if your mom was secure, relatively
Yeah.
speaking, and your dad was distant or avoidant, you will embed the avoidant pattern too, and you will notice that in
Okay.
relationship. But you'll have a secure pattern there too. So a secure base, which is great from mom because we tend to mirror their brain the most, right brain to
Mm.
right brain. And the other question that you asked
If you could,
was.
yeah, be still from a very secure, well, relatively speaking, like secure relationship with your parents, but then when it comes to romantic partners, could you still exhibit anxious attachment or avoidance style?
Oh, absolutely. So you can have a secure base, and if you
Yeah.
partner with someone who's very avoidant or very anxious or very disorganized, it will still wake things up in you. It doesn't mean that
Ah,
you're completely free of trauma or relationship conflict, but you'll come back to your baseline faster.
yeah.
Your just general sense of self and self-esteem will be healthier, so you'll be able to like withstand things easier, and you might even
I
be able
see.
to make those relationships more successful because they won't be
Right.
activating you at the same time.
Hmm. And then one interesting thing is, so you have this, let's say you didn't have such a secure childhood, and then you start developing a certain form of patterns, right? And then in the book, you mention that there's an energetic dance of relationships. So you start attracting a certain type of people. Why does that happen? Why do we end up falling for someone that we know is not going to be good for us?
So, we have a lot of implicit wounds and subconscious things going on below the surface until we heal and get really conscious of what our embodied experience has been. And I think that there's an allure to what's familiar. So, there's part of our system that will meet someone and will mistake love or a good fit or attraction to this
Mhm.
actually feels familiar to my nervous system. Something about this feels
Ah,
familiar. And you might not even notice it right away, but there are subconscious cues going off. So, someone, for example, my dad struggled with substance abuse when I was
mhm.
younger, and I had a tendency to gravitate towards men who struggled with substance abuse.
Ah,
And until
okay.
I kind of healed where that came from, which actually took me a while, you know, someone with substance abuse, even though it causes me so much pain because it brought up
Mhm.
the early wounding around my dad being unavailable, it was
Yeah.
also very familiar for me. So I was
Mm.
attracted to it.
I love how you use the word familiar, because what I was going to say was, why does our brain not recognize that even though it is familiar, like hurtful and familiar is completely different, right? But it's more of, we almost feel gravitated towards something that we recognize quickly, I suppose, when that happens.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a couples counselor too, and I study imago therapy, and there is a theory that we're always trying to get conscious.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, what happens is we keep repeating the same pattern over and over again, and there's like that core wound that keeps coming up and that sensation that we keep feeling. And part of the book and part of our work in life is to say, oh my God, I felt this before. Even if you don't remember it, because memory
Ah,
can be in just sensation,
yeah.
that, hey, this person who I love is waking up an earlier memory. It's not just about what's happening in the here and now. And we can become more conscious of what we went through when we were younger rather than staying unconscious.
So trying to be, at least be conscious of the fact that you are attracted to certain things because it's more of a familiarity, not because it's actually going to benefit you or this relationship is functional.
Yeah, I mean, the only way that when the silver lining to that is I did my deepest work in the relationship that was familiar because he brought
Yeah.
me home into like my earlier experiences. But you
Ah,
don't need a relationship that brings that. You could go to a really good therapist or someone that really knows how to work with the body and get in touch with your earlier experiences so that you don't have to get in touch with them in a relationship. But if
I
you
see.
are listening and you're struggling in a relationship, you can use that as a portal in to what is it activating from much earlier on. And so many people are like, no, the problem is my husband or my girlfriend. And it's like, okay, yeah, they are on the surface, they are the problem, but what are they waking up little me wise? What patterns are you repeating, and what do we need to meet differently so that that part of you can start healing, and that maybe they're activating it, as painful and as miserable as that sounds, like maybe they're activating it so that we can bring it up in our conscious awareness, hold it and heal it.
And we're going to touch upon this a lot deeper later on. But I think a lot of the times when something hurtful happens, the quickest way is to point the fingers at the other person, right? The partner or someone that hurts us, instead of really trying to think about, well, what did that person do to activate this reaction or this hurt inside of me?
Or what did this person bring up inside of me that was already there to begin
with? Gotcha. And now, so the wounded people sort of pair up, and then once the rosy tinted sort of honeymoon phase kind of disappear, as you mentioned, I think people fall into a lot of the messy part of the relationship. And this I really want to get sort of deep with you, because this was so interesting to me. So I have friends who are anxiously attached. And when that alarm goes off, they go into this like manic or frenzy mode of either like texting incessantly or calling them, or even doing something that almost seems like they're not here. And she's crying in a cafe, and the people are watching. But after reading your book, you talk about this thing called the sympathetic arousal and the dorsal state of like helplessness. So it seems that there's an actually systematic, very physical reaction that is happening in the nervous system, right? Could you go into that and why people react in a way that from the outsider, it might seem like they're really losing it?
Yeah, so we have different things that can cue us to a sense of danger. We call it neuroception, and it can be simple as your boyfriend not texting you back or someone showing up late. Can set off an avalanche inside your system. And it basically is saying, danger, I'm at risk for disconnection. And so you shift from what we call a ventral state, which is calm and connected, to a state of activation, usually sympathetic activation, where you're reaching out or you're crying for help, or you're just activated. You'll do anything to try to get into connection, and you don't know how to calm yourself down in that moment. So if you stay in that state long enough, you can eventually shut down and become helpless too. And these are all states that babies go through. So when you're a baby and you're upset, you actually start to cry, which is normal. It's normal to cry out and reach for your mom. But then if the cry gets louder and louder and louder, and mom doesn't come back, the fear sets in. And so basically that same alarm system gets set off in our adult relationships.
That to me, I don't know about other people, but that to me, that was so fascinating. Like it sort of like gave explanation and in a way sort of justification to a lot of the things that I've seen in my friends, and possibly in myself as well.
And hopefully a lot of compassion.
For me, I definitely gained a lot more compassion and understanding when I read that part about you. And it's almost, and you would go into sort of this detail about like when that mode happens, your senses get shut off, so you can't really hear properly, and your vision's also like narrow and get very focused, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, different things happen. You're just not open and connected, and you're not in an eventual state of calm, engaging. You're preparing for fight, flight, freeze. So you narrow your focus, you're not hearing the same. Yeah, like you're in a state of survival.
And in a way, that was sort of like kickstart the cycle of even becoming more anxious and more scared and even more sort of narrow focus, right? Because you're starting to lose the normal senses that would keep you sort of sane, I suppose.
Yeah, and you even start to hear differently, and you start to get very defensive. Everything becomes a little scarier.
And also that explains why during those moments when your friend, the outsider, tries to reason with you, it just doesn't get through to the other person most of the time.
Yeah, most of the time. I mean, sometimes having a friend just kind of sit with you, helping you breathe through it, or understanding that you're activated right now. And, sometimes connection with the person that you feel disconnected from is the one thing that can calm your nervous system. Sometimes they're not available if they're avoidant and they're avoiding you. So you need friends to hold that anxiety with you. And it underlying the abandonment wound that's there all along, and perhaps the avoidant person isn't capable of holding that space for you. So bringing that pain to someone who actually can hold it, and again, trace it back to its original roots. That's how we heal, is we start to make this less about the person who we think is hurting us and more about, oh my God, this is a deep attachment wound and it's early.
And then when you go into the dorsal state, which you explain as you refer to as like a baby crying his heart out and finally coming to almost an acceptance of shutting it down because of the helplessness. What happens when you reach that state emotionally?
Yeah, I mean, that's a scary state to be in. So dorsal is a state that's saying, like, I'm preparing for death. So there's going to be less blood pumping to my limbs as a baby. And you're basically conserving energy and shutting down your system. So it's a scary state to be in.
And in an adult, would that be exhibited as depressed state, or what would it?
Yeah, it could be. It could be a severe depressed state for sure. Yeah, when you're just so shut down and your body is starting to shut down on you.
I see. And when you go through all of this, I think then people start to develop different styles of relationship, quote unquote, fixes. And the first one that I wanted to talk to you about was, I'm just dropping the bomb here, the love bomb, which is the marriage. Yeah. And I really want to quote you on this, Jessica, because I loved this quote that you wrote. You said, outsourcing our sense of security to another person via legal contract. I was like, wow, that's such a great statement, because I love the word you use, the outsource, because it's like you're dumping it and putting the responsibility on the legal contract of marriage to sort of keep you secured, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's like really young parts of us we hand over to other people. And I think it can be really hard in a marriage to have one person be your only sense of security. While I also think in a marriage, there's an obligation to keep working on yourself and doing personal development and learning how to help and support your partner, and your partner doing their own work and not making them your only way to stay feeling safe in the world.
And I don't know if you've noticed this, but I think in our generation, there's two very extreme ends in the spectrum of marriage. And I'm speaking very generally. Of course, there are people in between. But the one is, some people are so vehemently and aggressively independent. So saying, I don't need a partner. I don't want anyone in my life. I'm going to just be by myself. And the other end of the extreme is, I just want a man to take care of me, or I want a wife who will handle all my crazies so I can just feel stable. And why are these two extremes dangerous or delusional to some extent? Granted, that it's perfectly okay to choose, to stay single or married, but the psyche behind it or the reasoning behind it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that being single is okay. And but if it's, I need to be alone and I don't want to let people in, that's actually a trauma response, right? And so we're biologically unwired to be in connection. Yeah. So if you don't romantic connection, we're really not thriving unless we have a lot of community. I know here in the Western culture, it's very idealized to be single and successful and independent. And really all of that is like a trauma response. That's not actually biologically how we're wired to really thrive. And it's a very lonely place to be. So, and sadly, our brains, some of our brain development is moving in that direction. And it's just really sad to see that happen. And then on the other end, it's just, over dependence. It's just that sometimes those relationships don't allow for other connections to come in, and the earlier the wounding, the more they'll be kind of enmeshed in that way. So it's just some healing that needs to happen. But I think everybody is so uniquely different, and figuring out what works for you. I prefer to be in a relationship, but I'm also okay with being alone. And that took time. That took time to be okay. Anxious people tend to need relationship because they didn't get a lot of steady, consistent holding. So another person can help them feel more secure, but then we all know that that can change at a drop of a hat very easily. So an avoidant person might feel more comfortable, independent and alone and not in relationship, but secretly and desperately they do want connection. They just don't know how to be in connection. So the golden interdependency and learning how to meeting someone who can, meet your needs and understanding how much space and closeness that relationship wants and finding someone who kind of fits that would be the goal.
And I think you talked about like in the book, you also talk about the fact that they kind of want the partner, or like in a marriage, they kind of want them to come in and then handle our problems, I kind of like dump it onto them and then have them be the fixer, I suppose, in all of our messes, right?
Into a marriage, especially if we enter like fairy tale marriages where our partner makes us feel wonderful and then we wake up one day and they don't make us feel wonderful anymore and we don't understand why, and then we're like, I'm mad at you, but really we're left with who we were to begin with and our work is still always there. But we could get stuck at the fact that I don't feel the same euphoria, I don't feel the same chemicals, I don't feel the same feeling from you, so therefore there must be something wrong with you. And that's just a dangerous road to go down. Who you were before your marriage lives inside of you, and your partner eventually and you will individuate in a marriage or in a relationship. You become individuals again, so you merge and then you individuate. And when you individuate, you're still going to be faced with those parts of yourself again.
Yeah. Oh, I love that word. You like merge together, but you have to individuate. Going
just the way a baby does with their mother. It's the same process that you do in romantic relationships. That's why attachment is all the same. The attachment you do early bonding is actually this. It gets replayed later.
And you know what? I mean, my writer's right here next to me. But actually, when we were discussing your book, after reading it, we kind of came together and did a little book club. And then actually we said something that you just said, which was, yeah, this is about relationship, but it feels more like just how to be human, how to make human connections, basically.
Yeah. And I've been in places in my life where certain relationships kind of shake you to a core and you relearn how to make human connection all over again, because I've had a lot of early wounding, early attachment wounding that I've had to heal.
And the second part of this love bomb is the fairy tale dreamers. For the fairy tale dreamers, I don't know if you know, but are you familiar with K-dramas? K-culture at all? Okay. So K-drama is famously known for the following storyline. So there is the meek, timid, less than stellar girl, who's struggling in life. And then all of a sudden she meets this notoriously rich, cold, but narcissistic boy. And then somehow he turns 180 degrees around and falls madly in love with the girl. And she's able to change him and they live a very happily ever life. And that's
boy.
kind of... I can already see the looming fear in your face. Yeah, and that's sort of like, just like, telenovela has its certain plot line, K-drama has a sort of the storyline that kind of follows very, very closely. And I really want to talk to you about why this can be very, very dangerous when it comes to people seeking relationships.
And is this like a story that's shown to young people?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So, unfortunately, that's imprinting like an ideal into their system at a very early age that, to what to look for and that it's possible to change another person. And it's really, really harmful. Trust me, I've been there. And I think if you're listening, falling in love with someone who's extremely narcissistic and cold and trying to change them is really like the recipe for insanity and disaster. But I also think, from my own personal experiences, I have fallen in love with someone who became cold and detached. Sometimes you need to, when you meet someone, you have to see them for who they are and love them for who they are, not see the potential and try to change them to be this potential that might exist in there. They might not be capable of changing, and it's not your job to change them. And so it's unfortunately that story is pretty toxic and not such a great thing for young people to be idealizing.
And I think it also ties in with sort of being swept off the feet as well, what you talk about, like the fairy tale dreamers, as in they have, you know, they're able to offer financial resources, they have the good looks. So in a way, I think they're sort of the garden variety of bad boys, I suppose. Yeah, they come with the whole package. And it's kind of a question also, but why do a lot of people fall for this type of guys or this type of women?
Well, I think definitely people with abandonment issues do, because people with neglect or abandonment issues are more likely to fall for someone with more of a narcissistic wound. Because if you have neglect and then someone comes in and they make you feel like the center of the world and they shower you with all this attention and they make your problems go away, you're basically, you know, that's like the missing developmental link. Like you didn't get that from your mom. You weren't the center of her world. You weren't flooded with those kinds of hormones in your brain. So when a guy or a girl comes along and makes you feel really special, there's nothing wrong with that, but you can lose reality and kind of not see the full picture and like miss red flags. I think we've all been there. I know I've certainly been there. And I think, you know, and I also don't have any regrets, but sometimes those relationships can actually, the fairy tale turns into actually the nightmare.
Oh,
Because you hand such a young, vulnerable part of yourself over to someone who also has young wounds and is not capable of holding or helping heal them. And if the person is more narcissistic, it ends up being a more of a controlling relationship. If you're more anxiously attached, you sacrifice and sacrifice and sacrifice yourself for the other person as an adaptive strategy. So you end up in a very scary situation where that person's usually withholding love or shutting down on you or controlling you in some way.
And then what would you say to those people? Because you do mention this in your book, but there are people who say that the kind of things that you just mentioned, the ups and downs, the roller coaster of the emotion, is the fun and the sexy part, and the nice guys and the stability is boring.
Yeah. The cold narcissist, if I can change them, then I can get them to love me. And that would go back to like, if I can get my parent to love me, the same desire of this person is really unavailable, not that interested, then it seems like a challenge and I have to work to get love. And that type of adaptation is that I must earn my love. I'm not good enough just as I am. You're sacrificing to the extent of, I'm going to do this for you so that you will love me.
Yeah.
You start to run into a problem. And a lot of that is, I'm going to do this so I can get love in return. It's a big expectation that you're placing on both sides.